Coming up on Arirang News, Samsung Electronics beats market expectations with its earnings for the third quarter. It was Samsung smartphones that pushed profits almost 18% higher from the quarter before. The U.S. Federal Reserve makes its third interest rate cut of the year, down another 0.25% as pressure grows on the Bank of Korea to cut too. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sends a letter of condolence to South Korean President Moon Jae-in on the death of the president's mother. It's their first interaction since June, fueling hopes that talks between the Koreas might resume. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has sent his condolences to President Moon Jae-in over the death of Moon's mother, Kang Han-ok. The presidential office says a letter was received through the Panmunjom channel and was delivered to the president last night.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un delivered a message of condolence on Wednesday to President Moon. He expressed his deep condolences over the death of the president's mother, Kang Han-ok. The message was sent through Panmunjom yesterday afternoon, and it was directly delivered to the president at Namcheon Cathedral in Busan late last night.
The Blue House did not specify which North Korean official brought the message, but according to a senior official, it was not Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who went to Panmunjom in June to commemorate the death of the late First Lady Lee Hee-ho, wife of former President Kim Dae-jung. The official says during the exchange there were no other discussions regarding other issues, but there are hopes this could signal the possibility of renewed dialogue between the two Koreas. This is the first direct contact between President Moon and Kim since their face-to-face with U.S. President Donald Trump at Panmunjom in June. World leaders were due to meet in Chile next month for the APEC summit, which among other things was expected to see the signing of a trade deal between the U.S. and China. That summit of countries around the Pacific Rim has been called off by the Chilean government because of unrest in that country. Another summit there on the environment scheduled for December is also off. Won Jung-hwan has this report.
The cancellation of a highly anticipated summit of world leaders fewer than 20 days out. Given the level of social unrest in his country, it appears Chilean President Sebastián Piñera was left with no choice but to pull the plug.
Our government, this has been a very difficult decision, a decision that causes a lot of pain, has resolved not to host the APEC summit that was scheduled to take place in November, nor the COP25 summit that was scheduled for the month of December. As president for the Chileans, I have to always put the problems and interests of the Chileans, their necessities and their hopes first.
Chile's decision to cancel the APEC summit and COP25 environmental conference in December comes after several weeks of violent unrest. The APEC summit, due to be hosted in Chile's capital Santiago on November 16th and 17th, was scheduled to bring together more than 20 world leaders, including South Korean President Moon Jae-in, U.S. President Donald Trump, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. In fact, Trump and Xi were expected to meet immediately after the summit to sign a Phase 1 trade deal that could potentially end their protracted trade war. Chile, in fact, offered a conducive setting for a deal since it's relatively neutral and a place where the two leaders were going anyway. However, Chile's decision now throws into question where and when Trump and Xi will sign a trade deal. But some experts are not overly concerned. A person familiar with the talks said the cancellation has made the situation awkward but doesn't affect the progress being made. The White House later said in a statement that the event's postponement would have no impact on the timeline of the signing of the trade agreement. Just after the COP25 cancellation, the United Nations said it was currently exploring alternative hosting options for the climate summit. It said officials are working out the best way to rearrange the event.
Indications we have so far at this present moment is that Chile would continue to serve as the presidency of the 25th session of the Conference of Parties. So the sort of leadership that they've been providing in the past months will continue.
Protest over a hike in metro fares spun out of control earlier this month. prompting President Pinera to pledge sweeping social and economic reforms, a crackdown on widespread corruption, and cabinet shakeup. Riots, arson, and protest over the past couple of weeks have left at least 18 dead, led to 7,000 arrests and business losses of around $1.4 billion. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
Meanwhile, the organizers of the APEC summit say they support Chile's decision to cancel the meeting as safety comes first. Eyes are now on whether the event can be rearranged or whether this will be the first canceled meeting in APEC's more than 30-year history. Kim Min-ji explains.
For the first time in APEC's 31-year history, a scheduled summit has been called off. Chile's announcement to cancel next month's APEC summit caught many off guard, given that it's such a large-scale event and the fact that heads of states were to attend. The cancellation also puts on hold a series of anticipated sideline meetings between world leaders. In a tweet, the APEC Secretariat said the forum supported Chile's decision, as the safety and welfare of Chile and APEC members are the top priorities. Without any mention of alternatives for this year, the tweet said Malaysia will host in 2020. In the past, although not on the same scale, an ASEAN meeting was postponed by a month in December 2006 in the Philippines due to a natural disaster, although some suggested that the cancellation was triggered by terror threats and anti-government protests at that time. Eyes are on whether the APEC summit will be held at a later date this year, and if so, when and where. It's speculated that organizers could skip a year as it would not be easy to make the necessary arrangements, given that the gathering involves heads of state. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And South Korea's presidential office says it's watching the APEC situation closely. That's according to a text message sent to the press by the Blue House spokesperson. The Blue House had said previously that President Moon would be going to Chile on a trip from November 13th to the 19th. On the way, he was due to make an official visit to Mexico as well. Since 1985, South and North Korea have held multiple reunions for families separated by the Korean War. Those meetings, however, did not include thousands of Korean Americans living in the U.S. But now U.S. lawmakers have passed a bill that could one day give them a chance to see their long-lost relatives. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
The U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs passed a bill on Wednesday calling for U.S. efforts to reunite Korean Americans with their separated family members in North Korea. The Divided Families Reunification Act, introduced by Democratic Representative Grace Mang, aims to achieve the goal through a twofold consultation method. It requires the U.S. Secretary of State to consult with the South Korean government on the potential opportunities for reunion, including video links, while pressuring the Special Envoy on North Korean human rights issues to act on the issue. Currently, Koreans living in the U.S. have been unable to meet their family members in the North due to lack of diplomatic relations between Washington and Pyongyang, as well as other political and geographical limitations. Several efforts have been made in the past to improve the situation, but it is the first time that a congressional panel has passed a bill on it. Doing so, the committee has agreed on the urgency of the matter. Many Korean Americans have not seen their family members in the North for more than 60 years, and they're running out of time as they're getting old. Meanwhile, U.S. lawmakers emphasize that the bill is a humanitarian matter, perhaps hinting that it should be considered separate from political and diplomatic issues. The bill still has to go through Congress and be signed by the president. But that is not going to be an easy process, given that the position of Special Envoy on North Korean human rights issue, which will be in charge of the project, is currently vacant, and that ongoing tensions mean the U.S. and North Korea are not likely to make a deal anytime soon. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
It was a better-than-expected performance for South Korea's tech giant Samsung Electronics in the third quarter, as rising sales of its brand-new smartphones helped boost its earnings despite falling chip prices. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Samsung Electronics saw its operating profits rise on quarter in the third quarter, though profits were sharply down from the same period last year. According to its finalized earnings report on Thursday, the South Korean tech giant posted operating profits of some $6.7 billion in the July to September period. That's down 56% on year, but up nearly 18% compared to the second quarter. Sales amounted to some $53 billion, down more than 5% from a year ago, but up 10% from the previous quarter. The company saw its operating profits decline on year as its semiconductor business saw profits fall due to lower memory chip prices. However, overall profits picked up on quarter thanks to increased sales of new gadgets. Samsung's mobile communications business performed better than market expectations, with its earnings jumping to more than $2.5 billion on the back of the release of the Galaxy Note 10 in August. Samsung has also outdone its global rivals in 60 countries, particularly in Europe, thanks to rising sale of its brand new smartphone model. Market watchers expect its latest release of foldable smartphones to contribute to the company's earnings for next year based on the expansion of 5G networks. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's industrial output was slightly down in September, due mainly to a fall in output in the service sector. According to Statistics Korea, overall industrial output fell 0.4% from the month before. The mining and manufacturing sector picked up slightly, but production in wholesale and retail declined. Private consumption was also down 2% on month because of a drop in sales of food and clothing. The statistics agency said the drop is due to temporary factors like the impact of several typhoons last month. As widely expected, the U.S. Federal Reserve has cut interest rates for the third time this year, citing the continued slowdown of the U.S. economy. The Fed is also planning to hold rates steady for the foreseeable future. Lee Seung-jae has more.
In a vote whose result was already baked into financial markets, the U.S. Federal Open Market Committee on Wednesday went ahead and lowered its benchmark funds rate by 25 basis points to between 1.5% to 1.75%. The cut is the third this year. Speaking to reporters, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said the central bank would hold rates steady for the foreseeable future, adding that the current level is likely to remain appropriate given the Fed's economic outlook of moderate economic growth, a strong labor market, and inflation growing at around 2%. Policymakers remained mostly optimistic over the U.S. economy, pointing to solid job gains and household spending rising at a strong pace. However, they said the rate cut was needed due to the continued slowing of the U.S. economy due to ongoing trade disputes and weak global growth. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, the U.S. economy grew 1.9% in the third quarter, falling short of the Trump administration's forecast of 3%. President Trump has been pressuring Powell throughout the year to sharply cut interest rates to take the shackles off the economy. Despite what Powell said on Wednesday, with Fed officials meeting again in 6 weeks, some analysts say they wouldn't be surprised if the Fed cut rates again in December. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea is taking a positive view of the U.S. rate cut. BOK Senior Deputy Governor Yoon Myung-sik said the Fed's rate cut helps remove some market uncertainty and will help support global growth and have a positive effect on the local economy. It also eases concerns, he said, about possible capital outflows from Korea. As for the BOK, with its key rate at an all-time low of 1.25%, the deputy governor said the bank will continue with its monetary easing. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news today, and for that, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for making time today.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So, as expected, the Fed rate cut by 25 basis points overnight. How have the markets reacted, and what's your outlook on that front in the near term?
Yes, as you said, Fed cut another 0.25 percentage point, now down to 1.75%. So 3 times cut in the last 3 months or so. This was widely expected as end of last year. That the economy is slowing down and the U.S.-China trade dispute continued. If we look at the rate cut, though, it is sort of the insurance type of rate cut, where the Fed might be cutting only 3 times, maybe 4 times, but anyway, not continually cutting because of the growth rate of GDP should stabilize around 2 percentage points. And this is kind of similar to what happened in the 1998 of third quarter when they cut the interest rate 3 times. And then if you look at the economic growth rate and the inflation numbers, it kind of remained quite steady. And then on year after, the inflation rose sharply, and then Fed raised interest rate very, very aggressively. At least we don't think, though, economic growth rate will go down to the recessionary territories. And also we don't think that inflation is going to pick up anytime soon. So therefore, the current level of the growth rate and the low inflation environment, which we call it as Goldilocks period, should continue for next several years, maybe next couple of years at least. So if that's the case, then we think that equity market should continue to rise. Current environment looks very positive for the equity investment.
Right. Well, we'll continue to watch that, of course, and the Bank of Korea will be watching, too. It's cut rates also to a record low level recently. It's actually lower than the Fed right now. So how will this decision affect what the BOK does next?
Well, if you know, you look at the fiscal budget that's happening right now, the Parliament is not passing the next year's budget yet. The opposition party and ruling party are fighting very aggressively in terms of the additional budget. So if the fiscal policy is not necessarily supportive of the economic growth rate to pick up in the future, then obviously you need to cut interest rate more aggressively. So BOK probably be faced with additional rate cut in the future. So U.S. cut 3 times, Korea cut twice. We think that Korea will follow that suit. Now, the supplementary, the next year's budget, which is 515 trillion won of the budget, and also the negative, the deficit number is about 1.8% of GDP, which is reasonable number, we think. So we need that to be passed quickly. If that's not the case, then lowering interest rate is more likely coming into before the end of the year. So we think that the overall economies will grow at 2% territories, but we don't see any major boosting to pick that up to 2.5%, 3% in the future. So if that's the case, we think that the Korean economic growth rate should be remaining below its intrinsic growth rate. If that's the case, the equity market performance should be okay, but relatively less than U.S.
Well, back here in Korea, the Samsung Electronics saw its profits in the third quarter fall from a year ago by 55%, but they were up from the quarter before a fair bit. We saw stocks up quite a bit today, but then closing quite a bit more subdued. What's going on at Samsung and in the local market? Sure.
As you said, the profits are down by 57% year on year, but on a Q-on-Q basis, it's up 17%. There are pros and cons of these numbers. We clearly see that the overall sales of the handphone was better than expected due to the Galaxy 10 and the foldable. But in terms of the chip and the LCD divisions, the numbers are still looking pretty bad. Particularly the DRAM business, it did better than expected, though, but nevertheless, the earnings were falling. Operating profits were down to 3 trillion from the previous of 3.4 trillion won. So clearly, the demand for the DRAM is not picking up as quickly as we like to see. But nevertheless, though, it is improving. And Samsung Electronics have said that the 5G will be probably picking up quite aggressively next year. China will commercialize the 5G next year, and Samsung will come out with the various lines of the 5G phones, and the actual price ticket will be probably lower for some of the new phones. So these things are definitely positive. If the 5G rollout is more aggressive next year, then Samsung's number will look good next year. As for the capex numbers, if they didn't think the demand is going to be weak, then they won't be investing that heavily. But it seems that they are investing quite the same amount as last year. They are expected to spend 29 trillion won of capex. The fourth quarter alone, 13 trillion won, which is the same as last year's number. So yes, the company is expecting the recovery that will come next year.
All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the South Korean government is moving to engage with European countries in joint R&D in materials, parts, and equipment technology. The Trade Ministry said Thursday the government's planning to forge a joint R&D program next month with European countries including Austria and Spain to secure technology in next-generation semiconductors and high-tech materials. It added that the joint R&D program would help diversify global demand and the supply chain. Seoul is looking for ways to make better use of fintech for the future finance industry. As part of 2019 Seoul Finance Week, the city held an opening ceremony Tuesday for the Seoul FinTech Lab in the business district of Yeouido. The Seoul FinTech Lab, the largest of its kind in the nation, will be housing 70 fintech startups and providing them with development support for up to 2 years. Also part of Finance Week, on Wednesday, experts discussed the trends and direction of fintech and international finance at the 9th Seoul International Finance Conference. The South Korean government and the ruling Democratic Party have announced their plan to reduce traffic and transport fees over the next decade. During a joint meeting at the National Assembly on Thursday, the two sides unveiled their so-called 333 Metropolitan Transportation Vision, which seeks to expand transport infrastructure in 5 major metropolitan cities: Seoul, Daejeon, Gwangju, Daegu, and the Busan-Ulsan region. The government plans to create a metropolitan express train that will reduce the travel time between major cities in the Seoul area by 30 minutes, cut travel costs by 30%, and shorten the transfer time from buses to other forms of transportation by 30%. Officials will also look into creating additional transport routes in and around Seoul, as well as building roads to ease congestion. The ruling party also vowed to create a task force to lead the new measures and to amend related laws as well. Global megastar boy band BTS wrapped up their world tour in Seoul earlier this week. While their fans eagerly wait for them to hit the road again, the House of BTS in Gangnam will continue to offer fans their own up-close experience with the boys and their music. Kan Hyung-woo reports.
Welcome to the House of BTS, a pop-up store solely dedicated to the 7-member Korean boy band, who are now one of the most influential artists in the world. The BTS pop-up store, located between Seoul's Gangnam Station on subway line number 2 and Shinonyeon Station on line 9, has been attracting tens of thousands of fans from all over the world since its grand opening on October 18th.
They deliver very positive energy, and also they give good conception to fans all around the world, and they give good influence to fans around the world.
The 4-story complex is divided into 2 sections. The basement is the main showroom where visitors can check out BTS-related merchandise and mark down what they want to buy in the catalog, which is given to customers as they line up outside the store. After finishing their order, fans can receive what they bought on the first floor. The second and third floors are designed to make fans feel as if they're in one of the band's famous music videos, with scenes recreated from their Idol and DNA videos. There is no entrance fee, but there's a long line of fans wanting to go inside.
We lined up at 6 in the morning exactly, stayed for 5 hours, but you know what? It's worth the wait. We're here now. This place is so amazing.
The House of BTS is open every day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. except for Wednesdays. But it will open on Christmas Day and New Year's Day, both of which fall on a Wednesday this year. The store will close its doors for good on January 5th, 2020. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
The 2019 Overseas TV